Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true firsthand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. Stopping by to take a ride with us today is a man who in his time on planet Earth has had the opportunity to wear many different hats. From having a very successful career as a famous Hollywood actor, only to experience a dark night of the soul in which he discovered he was not being truly fulfilled in his line of work and ultimately ended up leaving Hollywood to pursue psychotherapy. He has moved through these perceived challenges with the perspective of it all happening for him rather than to him. In addition, he is a practitioner of various types of psychotherapy, such as somatic psychotherapy and leadership psychotherapy, and has had his fair share of life-expanding plant medicine experiences as well. His knowledge and expertise in the field of psychology makes him an amazing person to chat with about the realms of plant medicines and psychedelics alike, and therefore, I am beyond excited to welcome the one, the only, David Sutcliffe to the show. David, my man, hello.
What's up, man? Good to be here.
Long time no see, you know? For everyone listening, we just finished the Highly Optimized episode too. So I get Dave twice today. I'm super lucky and very excited to have you on this show as well.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. The reason I love this show, right? Like I love doing Highly Optimized and getting the full scope of someone's journey. But considering that plant medicines in most places have been illegal for all of our lives, right? Most people I have on this show. I love hearing how people were first introduced to them, right? Because I imagine for you, I know for me, there was a lot of limiting beliefs and stories surrounding plant medicines, psychedelics, et cetera, that I grew up with the DARE program and all these things, you know, just say no movement, all this stuff. And so I really love getting an inside look at how you first became aware of them. And when you decided, like, actually, yeah, I want to try these, what was that process like for you?
Well, I was never really into drugs in high school, even smoking weed, mushrooms, any of that. So I was an athlete. So I was kind of square in a lot of ways. And then over time, I had a few casual mushroom trips in my 20s, which were powerful. And I started reading Terence McKenna and getting into it a little bit. But it really wasn't until I was in my 30s where a friend started experimenting with ayahuasca. And he told me about it. And he was like, you need to go. And I was no fucking way. That sounds crazy. I don't know. Like, you're crazy.
Yeah.
You're going to drink this brew that takes you completely out of control. Like it was a hard no for me. And I could feel it scared me, the idea of losing control. And then I started to see more and more articles and more people talking about ayahuasca. So it was probably about 10 years ago now where I finally called him up and I said, all right, I think I'm ready. I want to go. And he said, okay, there's a ceremony in 2 weeks. So it was a Santo Daime ceremony with a guy named Jonathan Goldman, who's got a place up in Oregon. He's a very well-known guy. He's actually the guy who got ayahuasca, at least through the Daime, legal in the United States. It's legal if you're part of the Santo Daime church. But he was a well-known guy, committed guy, and was known for having very strong medicine. And so that's where I got introduced. You know, they do daytime ceremonies, Santo Daime, and I did one ceremony, and it was terrifying, to be honest. When the medicine came on, I immediately went into terror, and it was a hell realm, and I did not like it at all. I didn't know how to navigate it. I didn't know anything, and it was incredibly disconcerting. And I remembered right before the ceremony, somebody had said to me, look, if you get into trouble, just try to be thankful for whatever experience you're having. And I remembered that. And so I started to say to myself, like, you know, thank you for this experience. Thank you for this experience. And it created a little separation between me and the feeling of fear, terror, really. And I just that sliver of space gave me some relief. And then the music started and I looked up and then I brought all my attention to the music, and the music really kind of pulled me out of this hell realm. And then I was able to really like sink into it and feel how beautiful it was. And then, just my field opened up and I spent a lot of time outside. Didn't really resonate with the tradition of the Santo Daime. Even then it was something about the music. It just wasn't for me. But they were very kind and let me just go outside in the garden. That's where I spent most of my time. But it took me a year to do it again because of that little 5-10 minute experience of when the medicine came on of being in terror. I just didn't want to face that again. So, but it took me a year, but I found another place to do it. And then I got into it, and that's when my journey, began in earnest. I went pretty hard for, I wasn't hard, but I went pretty serious for the next, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. And so what I heard there was that Aya was like your first big experience. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. And, for me, it's funny, Aya is one of the only medicines I haven't danced with yet, which is, yeah. And I'm very excited to meet her one day, but I'm also waiting for the call. And, being how I operate within the realm of plant medicines is I am super excited and ready to experience them at any time. So what I do is I try to really tailor that back and go, okay, is this just more of like a desire? Like, am I just desiring this, or is it actually like feeling like a calling? And just recently, it's actually began feeling as though it's a calling, right? And I've experienced other callings in my life from, I have to go to this music festival for some reason to, hey, this is the job I want to, I'm going to leave this job now, things like that. And so I've been able to quantify what that calling feeling is like. But I 100% agree with you. The first time I ever experienced psychedelic medicines, psychedelic medicines that aren't extremely easy to work through, like MDMA, was psilocybin. I did about 1 gram with some friends, and I knew enough at that point. I'm like, I'm not going to go in super heavy. I was like 23 by the time I decided to try them for the first time. So I had a lot of other friends like, no, you go try it. Tell me how it goes, and so I knew they were safe enough at that point. This is before all the Johns Hopkins research came out saying like they're actually the safest thing ever. But, I had this very interesting experience where there was no fear, rather no scariness, but there was some fear, right? There was some like fear of like, is this going to go a certain way? Then I decided to continue dipping my toes in over the years, and had a couple experiences on, heroes doses, as they call it, the Terence McKenna 5 dried grams in darkness type experience, where I was like, wow, that was very interesting. I don't know what just happened or where I went, but that was very interesting. More recently, interacting with 5-MeO DMT has brought me to that point that, I've never really been frightened on psychedelics. I've had some interesting experiences where mistakes, I don't want to call them mistakes, but like things happened that essentially allowed me to take much larger doses than I was ready for. And I worked through that okay. That being said, 5-MeO DMT, I don't know if you've worked with it before, but that is like complete dissolution, right? And that was one of the first times that I felt like fear on psychedelics. And I knew I had separation from it enough to know like, okay, I know that I'm not actually dying, but like that doesn't really give me much because the ego is telling me I'm dying. So I still need to convince it. And meanwhile, I'm like disintegrating. So it's like trying to figure stuff out and do things like that while you're disintegrating. Quite the challenge, And so, I'm curious, you said that, you connected with ayahuasca, and then you've found that rhythm in a way, right? Where now you're like, okay, I found the way in which I enjoy it, right? Maybe being in the garden, figuring different methods out of consumption for trying it, different tribal ways of interacting with it. Someone might ask, and I can imagine, probably not anyone listening to this show, but I can imagine someone might go, Dave, like, what's the invitation or what's the curiosity for you to keep trying it, right? Like, why isn't it one and done? And so I'd love to hear your explanation of what you continue getting from it. Is it different flavors of the same flavor? Like, is it different flavors of chocolate, let's say? Or is it like completely different? Like sometimes it's strawberry, sometimes it's vanilla, sometimes it's, pistachio, like it's completely different lessons. Is it similar lessons or completely different or a mixture of the both?
Yeah, it's probably a mixture of the both. For me, once I started, drinking regularly, there was a place out in Joshua Tree that I started to go to, not almost monthly, for about a year. And I learned to surf the medicine in a sense. It was like learning to surf, like learning to navigate the waves, navigate the space. Because what happens is, a space opens up and there's information in that space and there's things to understand. And there is a dissolution of your ego. And when your ego dissolves, it allows you to have a direct connection with spirit, for lack of a better term, into these other realms. And so you can really see yourself in a much different way than you're used to seeing yourself. So you can see your mask. You can see the image that you're trying to project out into the world. You can see the games that you're playing with yourself, the lies that you're telling, the secrets, all these things that are primarily unconscious. And maybe you have moments where aware of them. It exposes all of that. And that can be both humiliating and terrifying and also liberating. So that's almost an endless game. Like that, there's your unconscious being revealed to you. It's almost an infinite game. And so there's always more material to mine, I think. For me, going back to my first experience, it was all about fear, because I did this intense core energetics, radical aliveness work for years, went through the training program and did a lot of very, very deep work around my anger and my pain. But getting to the root of my fear was very difficult. It's hard to feel our fear, especially if it's young fear, some kind of pre-verbal fear, because we have no cognitive association with it. And it really wasn't until I drank ayahuasca for the first time that I realized how much fear I actually had. And then the more I drank, the more, like for me, ayahuasca is scary every time. It doesn't mean that I go into the hell realm or the terror realm every time, but it's almost always going to be scary. And I went through a series of about 15, 16 ceremonies where it was just like I would drink and 35, 40 minutes later, I'm in this hell realm and I'm just trying to navigate it. I'm just lost in a maze inside my own mind and I'm just suffering. And there was a certain point where, and I got some counsel around it. Like, am I going crazy? Like, should I be doing this? Is this worth it for me? And the answer I got back was, no, keep going. There's something there for you. And sure enough, I did an isolation retreat, a Shipibo isolation retreat. And Shipibo is a style of ceremony. There's a tribe in Peru, Shipibo people. And so this was an isolation retreat where you started with a ceremony and then you went into isolation for 5 days in the woods. And 4 of those days you were fasting. And then you would come out at the end of the 5th day, you would do a ceremony. Then you go back to your spot on the 6th day. At the end of the 6th day, you would drink again and have a ceremony. That was the end of the experience. And on the second night, I lost my mind out there. It just all of my stuff came up and I was terrified, and all of my negative thinking and all of my self-loathing and all of my self-judgment. It just was right there. And I didn't, it was not pleasant, but I got to the other side of it and something changed, something shifted. And the rest of that experience for me was actually mostly just blissful. So that's what it was for me. It was really like ayahuasca helped me get to the root of my fear and helped me understand my fear. It helped me understand a lot of other things about myself, but that was like that thing that was driving me. And it worked. And it's not for everybody, but it worked for me. I felt a very strong call. I also felt really drawn to the shamanic traditions, and I started to work. I lived with a Shipibo maestro for 2 years. So I was also interested in the techniques of how they worked with people and how the shamans navigated that world. And so there was also information in there for me about how I wanted to frame and understand my work. I could take what I was learning in these ceremonies and apply it to the work that I was doing, the core energetics, radical aliveness work that I do. So it also became a training. It was a way that I could train. And it has very much impacted the way I think about and approach the work that I'm doing. It's like another layer that I've added, and it feels very, very powerful.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show. Yeah, and something you mentioned there was really interesting, which was, it's hard to discover and put words to the fears you have when they came about before you had the cognitive abilities to attach a language to them. And what I thought there was like the aspect of sometimes a lot of the things that we're feeling are qualitative in nature. It's impossible to put an actual term to them. There really isn't even a term to them. It just is, right? Like it's just fear, right? It's not fear because of or fear due to this. It's just fear. That is one of the things that has challenged me the most in psychedelics is when I find myself stuck in a loop of, well, it needs to have a meaning. And it's like, no, it's just fear. Explore it, move through it, and get out the other side, right? It doesn't matter. And Anat's famous for saying that, like, you don't need to know what came out when you had a purge or when you cried or anything like that. The human wants to know, well, what came out? What was that? It's like, it doesn't really matter. All it matters is it left and you put it down and you stopped carrying it, and that's been something that's really been freeing for me in my experiences. And that's one of the main reasons why when people talk to me about psychedelics, I'm like, listen, so long as you respect them, right? Like you were saying, when you were saying, thank you for this experience. Thank you for this experience. For me, why I love psychedelics is because every experience can be drastically different. You can have 10 experiences that are perfectly bliss, right? And if you get caught into the mind trap of being like, oh, I figured this out. I can handle this, right? I can handle a couple of plants. It's like, yeah, they're gonna bite you back, right? And it's all medicine, right? Like anytime that's happened to me, I've ended up thinking on the other side and being like, all right, yeah, I kind of needed that, and that's why it's so important to learn how to do these and how to work with these medicines from elders. And I'm curious, when you were living with the Shipibo tribe, what were some of the individual things you picked up from them? I know you briefly went over it, like being able to include a lot of those shamanic practices in your work. But I'm curious, and I bet everyone listening is too, like, what's it like to live in a tribe like that for 2 years? Like, were you in Peru?
No, I was just living with a guy, an American, but who was a trained Shipibo maestro. So he had spent a lot of time down in Peru, a lot of time. And he was trained. He's, very, very powerful guy. And so, but I lived with him in Los Angeles. Cool. But the point is, I was in, I was in a medicine space. I was in the world of that for 2 years. So it was around, ayahuasca is in the house, and we're oriented to it all the time. He's, cooking it, or he's preparing his ceremonies and going through all the rituals and talking about it all the time and talking and getting the behind the scenes, right? Like, and what it's like to be a shaman and what it's like to lead these ayahuasca ceremonies and what his experience is and what he's seeing and how he's approaching it. And that was like incredibly powerful experience to be with somebody who committed their life to that, because it's so intense, the ayahuasca. It really is. It's not for everybody. And to go so deep into it that you are able to master the space enough that you can then help other people heal. And Shipibo tradition is very specific, where they are almost doctors, right? Like they have a style of chanting that creates a vibration where they work with people directly through the chant. So the chanting and the singing is to clean, essentially. That's their Bayungain. It's like to clean. They're cleaning, and they're cleaning trauma. And it's incredibly intense. It's done in the dark, and it's just nonstop, like very intense chant. So it can be beautiful, but it can also be extremely unsettling. It's not like, the Santo Daime or other traditions that are derivative of it, where you're sitting and it's like soft, nice, like music, like kind of spiritual music. It's not that at all. It's like confronting, and it can be, and so and I'm very oriented toward that. Like my own work is very challenging. So yeah, to be in the presence of somebody and to understand the methodology and how they're thinking about it and how they're inhabiting these worlds. I mean, they really are working with spirits, and they're calling in these spirits, and these spirits are guiding them. And they all have a different kind of orientation, but the way they use the plants, the way they use tobacco, the way they use sage, the way they set up the space and the ceremony, all of that was just fascinating to me. So it's like to be around some like people who are very steeped in the shamanic traditions and the wisdom and the knowledge that they have. And not only that, it's like how they orient to the world, right? I mean, you want to talk about like not being in the material world. These people live in a completely other dimension of reality, because that's the space they're always in. It's like a lot of us, maybe we inhabit that space, for 20 minutes a day in our meditations, or we do an occasional plant medicine journey. These people are living in this space all the time. And so there's information they're getting and a perspective that they have that is so incredible. And it's hard for me to like I want to be here on the planet. It feels like my work is to translate to what I've learned from these realms and bring it to people in a straightforward way. But for these shamans, it's like that's not what it is. Like they're really channeling through these spirits. And so yeah, I mean, it was really my own curiosity. Like, what's it like to be close to and understand the mindset and approach of a real shaman? And they're also, they're human. They're people. They got their issues. They have an ego, and there's all kinds of things going on, but it's a whole other world that I found just fascinating.
Yeah. And the analogy, one of my love languages is analogies. That's how the universe speaks to me. And one of the analogies I got was, it sounds like you and I are very similar, where we're like family medicine doctors, right? We take the reports and we help people understand them better. Whereas these shamans are straight up surgeons, right? Like they're staying up 16 hours in a shift. I mean, they're sleeping during the day and staying up at night. I mean, they're completely backwards, quote unquote, from what, typical life is. Whereas I feel just like you, I enjoy exploring these realms because for some reason, and whatever it is, I was joking about this recently, like someone asked me while on a deep plant medicine experience, like, how are you able to like talk and vocalize these things and like do normal life things, pack cannabis bowls and roll joints and do things and, kind of like keep watch of everyone? And I'm like, I have no idea, but all I know is that whatever it is thousands of lifetimes in the making. And it's like,
right.
So for some reason, I enjoy that just the same way that some people really enjoy the gym, right? Like almost have an obsession with it, where some just go there because they're like, yeah, it's good. And I don't really like love it, but I do it because I know I should, right? I would stay in the gym all day if I could, right? And I'm the same way with plant medicines. And so, I really enjoy those experiences, yet just like you, I do enjoy the material realm. Like I do enjoy being here. I love exploring, but I like coming back home to whatever you call this reality. I can imagine for someone listening who maybe has done some psychedelics or maybe has not, they might be curious, like, well, what are some markers that I might react well with psychedelics? Of course, there's no guarantees, but in your experience of, sitting with different maestros and working alongside other people and seeing other people go through it, are there certain trends in the human being you've noticed that you might say, hey, like if a best friend hit you up and was like, Dave, how do I know if I'm going to react well with mushrooms or ayahuasca or any plant medicine? You might say, okay, well, if you happen to like this and this or have this quality, that might be a sign. Of course, there's no guarantees, but what are some correlations you've seen between people that seem to react well with plant medicines?
It's a great question. I mean, it's hard for me to really know. What I usually say to people is like, and you alluded to this, like, do you feel a strong calling? And why? And to ask yourself why. And to really like pay attention to that and to sit with it for a period of time, like to make the commitment. If you're going to do it and do it right and take it seriously, like really let it be about transformation and healing. And what is it that you're looking to heal? And what is the experience you're hoping to have? And if you hold that in your consciousness with good intentions, it's going to find you. You have to trust the miracle of it. And that happens. That will happen. Now that's a hard thing for people to wrap their head around. If you really, ayahuasca will, and that's the thing that I have the most experience with, it will find you. You'll be at a party and somebody says, and you'll know it'll line up. You'll know it'll be right. You don't have to go necessarily looking for it. Doesn't mean you can't ask your friends. I mean, I have lots of people asking me, where, and the truth is, like, there's different people. I know different people who are holding ceremonies, and they're all different. They all have different styles. They have different approaches. And so there are certain people that I feel would probably be better suited for certain kind of approaches, and some are more intense than others. And so that's usually how I think about it and qualify it. And I just go on instinct, and then, I'll recommend maybe one or two, but yeah, some ceremonies are more intense than others. And I do notice that certain kinds of people are attracted to different kinds of ceremonies and different kinds of plant medicines for whatever reason. To just trust that, like, you can get something from everything. I don't think one is any better than the other. And, some people will say, oh, this is more intense than that. Maybe, but you'll be drawn to what you're drawn to. And I think that's the main thing, is just to trust your intuition, to make sure it's not your ego. It shouldn't be about FOMO. It should really be a calling to, like, the intention is to heal. I'm going to take this seriously, and then just trust that it will find you.
Yeah. And, something that's so interesting to me too, is how many different ways you can experience something like ayahuasca. Like you were mentioning, very similar to what I've heard. A lot of my friends, they go to a place in Colombia and they're like, hey, this is different than most ceremonies. You're not inside of a hut. You're not all doing it together. It's a daytime ceremony, and they allow you to just roam the jungle, right? Like, right. Of course, there's certain barriers and everything, and they make sure you're in a confined area. But within that confined area, they have like a nice little maze of garden and whatever, and you can just go hang out in there. And that seems like, when I heard that, I like that approach. That just called to me right away, where I'm like, yeah, being inside of a room. Like, I heard one of Aubrey Marcus's stories, and it's honestly a really funny story, where I think it was his first time doing ayahuasca. And he's like, yeah, so I'm starting to feel it. There's one woman screaming, I can't tell if I shit my pants or I didn't shit my pants. And he's like, she's just yelling that over and over. And then as soon as I start trying to meditate through it, someone next to me pukes all over my socks, like just like in the dark, right? So I'm like peeling these puke-laden socks off my feet. And he's like, so it was just a certain experience, right? And of course, you handle the punches as they happen, right? I mean, something will only be quote unquote ruined if you allow it to. But that being said, I know that I'm a walker, right? Like, I like to like move, and I like to stretch and kind of get myself moving, and also like allow whatever's coming out of me to work out of me. I remember when I did peyote, I mean, I was moving a lot, just walking, laying, crawling, purging. I mean, a whole lot of different stuff. And I can imagine that if I was inside of a certain place where I like wasn't supposed to leave, or if that was like a certain belief that maybe I picked up, that would have led to some challenge in the overall experience I had. One of the things that I'm curious is, why do you feel right now there's such a reemergence of popularity, if we want to say, with psychedelics, or just interest, let's say, like interest, curiosity with psychedelics? And, I know obviously with what just happened in 2020, people are obviously looking to believe in something higher than themselves or bigger than themselves, and that could be a potential reason. But I'm curious, as someone who's seen a lot of these ceremonies, and I imagine has seen different types of people relating to these medicines, maybe you picked up some correlations or some trends. Like, really, I mean, you can talk about it from personal experience too. Why did you seek out psychedelics to begin with? And why do you feel others are doing the same right now?
It's a great question. I think we're all trying to heal. I think we're, for the first time, starting to come to terms with the fact that we have healing to do, that trauma is a real thing, and we all have it in different ways. And that's a psychotherapy it's a new phenomenon. We're just like the 100+ years we've been thinking about the psyche and the unconscious and how our minds actually work. It's brand new. I was just saying in the other podcast, like, we've been in survival mode for so long that now that we've created abundance, it's obviously, it's not for everybody, but for a lot of us in the West, there's plenty of abundance. We have the time now to look at ourselves and to try to examine these things. And so that's what we're doing. And it makes sense to me that as we become more aware of how our minds work, that we're going to seek these, indigenous traditions to help us, because obviously they understand something about the fundamental nature of reality that we do not. I mean, I get that from the Lakota people. They don't practice plant medicine, but through their sweat lodge and through their songs. And I mean, it's as intense as any plant medicine ceremony I've ever been in. There's some other technology at work, and it's bringing us back to the earth. I mean, that was my feeling when my first ayahuasca ceremony was over. I was like, this is here for a reason. This isn't random. Like, why is this plant? I mean, it's a combination of two plants, which is the other thing. How the fuck did they figure that out? Yeah. Right. That's in and of itself is a miracle. And I know the shamans were like, well, the plants told us, which sounds preposterous until you actually drink ayahuasca. And you're like, oh no, that makes a lot of sense that these plants have a kind of intelligence and they are communicating with us. But it just felt like they were here for a reason. It's here to teach us something about ourselves. And so, we're meant to be using them. We're meant to be elevating our consciousness. I think with everything that's going on in the world, with the technology that we're creating and how that's changing us and changing our brains, it's just like we are at a moment of evolution. I don't know where any of this is going. We can't know, obviously, but it does feel like we will look back at this time, in, I don't know, 500 years, 1,000 years, and be like, this was the moment when human beings evolved into some new thing. Like, we are no longer Homo sapiens. I mean, we are already integrated with machines in the sense of most of us are attached to our phones and they've become an extension of our brain. And so that process, I think, is just going to continue, and we're going to become more and more integrated with the technology that we create. And so at some point, are we really human anymore? Or are we Homo sapiens in the same way? We're something else. We've evolved to some kind of new species. And so I have a feeling that these psychedelics and all the therapeutic practices and the understanding of trauma and the meditation is all a way that is helping us facilitate a deeper understanding and awareness of who we actually are so we can evolve.
Yeah. And, it's so funny. You mentioned we'll look back at this time and the way I see it is we're going to laugh so hard. Remember when we thought we were so advanced, but we made plants illegal? Oh my God, that was hilarious. Right. And, so many things like that are funny because it shows the immaturity still of man at large, right? Of course, there are plenty of people that don't believe that, but if you look at the establishment, right, or the powers that be, quote unquote, and it's their whole argument for this is just, it's really fading away. We're at this really interesting point now where, with cannabis, right? I come from the cannabis industry, and so, you look at how more than half the states, almost all states now are decriminalized. Over half the states are medical, and it's just about half the states are recreational now. And yet the federal government still decides to say it's illegal. And one thing I don't know if they recognize is I don't know if they're really aware of how much that makes people not believe in anything they do, right? Because, and this is kind of the cross they're bearing right now, which is there's actual scientific evidence, right? It's more than just states deciding to do their own thing. There's actual quantifiable data showing that things like psilocybin, things like cannabis, things like MDMA, ketamine are having incredible results in psycho-assisted therapies. And so for them, right, a bunch of politicians to decide this is illegal, I think that's actually going to be the nail in the coffin for a lot of people not believing in the establishment anymore, because I think more and more people are turning on to the idea of, why don't we let scientists figure out what is true and untrue and let politicians, I don't know, do whatever they pretend to do anyway, And it's very interesting. And, this is a great time in the conversation that with this podcast, this is why I love this, because I can ask the weirdest questions. And so I've had some very interesting and weird experiences happen when I've been on psychedelics. Some that I really have no words for. Like I literally could not find words for. And that being said, I'm curious, having sat with Aya so much, having experienced things that aren't even psychedelic, right? With the Lakota tribe, sweat lodges, things like that. I mean, God, a serious workout could do this, right? But in your life in general, let's say, what is at least one of the strangest experiences you've experienced, right? Either you felt ancestors around you or any of these things that you hear people talk about. I love really getting into this because for me, I love being open-minded. And I think that's one of the main strengths that psychedelics allow us to do is realize that we don't know anything. And when you realize you don't know anything, all the rest of life can be play because then you become unattached to being right? Or being wrong. You're just like, I don't know. I know that I don't know. I can choose to believe things that help my experience of life become quote unquote better, but I don't know anything. And so I'm curious in your expanded mind, right? In your open-mindedness that's come from psychedelics, what are some of the things that maybe you have words for, maybe you don't, that have happened that have allowed you to be like, what was that? I'm curious.
Well, I think one of the central questions that people have around ayahuasca is what are the beings that you're seeing? Because you see things, you see elves, which Terence McKenna talks about.
Yeah, machine elves.
And you see you have all kinds of very strange visions. Fractal patterns obviously is the most common, but it's not just that. You have other ghosts or entities, light beings. Like it's hard to know exactly what they are. And I think everybody's mind makes sense of them in different ways. I don't know, is that something that's being generated from within my own mind, or is that something that's outside of me that the medicine allows me to see? I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is that I've had powerful experiences of feeling like I've been, something is doing surgery on me, that there is a light above me and there are sort of light beams coming down and doing things to me.
Consensually, hopefully.
Well, I guess I drank the medicine, so it's consensual. But but light that's coming into my body, that it's a little scary, but ultimately you just have to surrender to it because this is the experience you're having. You have to trust it and give over to it. And so is that some alien entity that is coming down to heal me? There are lots of people, and including shamans that I know and trust, that would say yes, and that they say that we are working with aliens or light beings, and we call them in and they're here and they're guiding us, and that's what's happening. I'm open to that idea. I don't know. I don't think we can know, but it doesn't really matter. Like something is happening that's powerful and healing. And that's what I believe in. So you have all kinds of strange experiences like that. And, I've had different ghosts and entities, like I was saying, come, and I've asked them questions and gotten answers. And, sometimes you're also lost in the void. And that can also be an incredibly powerful experience where you are face to face with the nothingness. And is that something that's being generated inside my mind, or am I actually coming face to face with the true existence of the void? I don't know, but all of these things, they're real. Now, are they, like, again, it's like, that's the question, what is real? And that's, we can talk about that, but it is real. And that's the one thing I know that I feel, and what everybody says when they come out of an ayahuasca ceremony, that world that I visited is more real than this world that I live in. That's more real. That's what is real. And that feels true. Like you feel the building blocks of reality. You feel that everything is energy. You feel that there's other ways of communicating through these fractals, through these symbols, that there's like infinite intelligence in there, like that consciousness is actually a physical, tangible thing, and that you are part of it and it's expressing itself through you. And that the separation we feel from that we create around that is what creates our suffering. And we can somehow surrender to what that is, right? We can come into this bliss state, and not just a bliss state, but also like we are connected to that intelligence. There is a knowing beyond the rational mind. And when you have that experience, it's hard to forget it. It's not always easy to get back to it in your regular life, but it leaves a massive impact on you. And again, like, how do you make sense of these experiences? That's for the individual, I think. I don't think there's any one way, and different people and different shamans I don't think it matters. It's just like, this is what's happening, and you let the experience happen. And it's deeply profound every time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's, in my experience, where a lot of people get challenged with psychedelics is they start trying to make sense of it, especially like with things more like mushrooms and things that aren't necessarily so overwhelming as ayahuasca would be, of course, depending on dose. But they start trying to use the mind to quantify the experience. And it's like, listen, not the right tool for the job. Just let go and let God. Right. And the whole idea that you mentioned about consciousness being just an entity of itself, right? And even though it might not be attached to a human or, a wall, a rock, right? Whatever, it still exists, and it's still a conscious being, right? In and of itself. And it holds information in it. That's one of the most interesting things I've felt personally since I've begun interacting with biogeometry. Have you heard of that before?
No.
So it's similar, like same, but different to sacred geometry. Sacred geometry is more of like the idea of what biogeometry actually is a modality of, if that makes sense. And biogeometry is, they call it the design language of shapes. And so it's founded by Ibrahim Karim and his family. Dorea Karim's one of the other top people. And I found out about it through the Czechs. Basically, it's almost like feng shui's older, cooler brother, right? Like, that's how I put it, where feng shui, and again, like some of these things I hear and they kind of make sense, but I imagine they might not make sense to a lot of people because I'm still having trouble understanding what this means. But they say feng shui works between time and space, whereas biogeometry goes to infinity. Now, the reason that might be really hard to understand is because how, as humans, can we quantify what infinity is? Right. Everything in our lives has a beginning and an end, right? This conversation has a beginning and an end. This phone has a beginning and an end of life cycle. Everything in our lives is finite. So it's really challenging to understand what the real repercussions of that are. But what I've noticed is, especially like I wear certain pendants. I don't know if you can see it right here, but there's certain pendants I wear that have what's called biosignatures on them. And basically what these are is certain shapes that correlate to different metabolic processes in the body. And so how biogeometry works is saying that the human being, just like everything, right? Allegedly, throw the conspiracy in there, is a torus, right? And so it's got a center and it comes out and it goes back around and sucks back in and goes around, right? I probably used terrible terminology there, but you guys get the point. And so basically in that we have the human biofield, right? All the frequencies that make up the human being. And so what's happening now with 5G and things like that and EMFs is that all of these other frequencies are hitting us. And so our body, it's like trying to do a math test and someone yelling in your ear. No matter how much you studied, you're not going to really be able to focus and figure out what you're doing. And so the human body is having challenges figuring out what frequency goes into like the liver, the kidneys, whatever. And that's their whole hypothesis, is that this is where a lot of the disease we're seeing comes from, is the inability of the human being to remember how to heal itself. And since I've begun taking courses on that and wearing the jewelry and having the cube in my house, which is part of the home kit, they call it, and I've been interacting with psychedelics, something drastically different is happening. And again, it's a quality, not a quantity, so it's very hard to put into words, but especially doing 5-MeO DMT, wearing this stuff, it's been a very big game changer. I'd only done 5 once before I had this, but since doing it with that, it was almost like a part of me, I imagine the infinite part of me, understood things that I didn't necessarily remember coming back. Like, I can't really explain what it was, but it was almost like when I went into that experience, something that was stuck became unstuck. And again, like, correlation isn't equal causation, but I'm very intuitively called to think that it was biogeometry that did it. One of the other things that you mentioned before was sound. This is another thing. I remember it's really funny when you start being able to have a working relationship with your ego. So it's no longer the enemy and the mission is not to kill your ego. And the ego starts realizing, all right, this crazy person is going to do this thing again, and I know I'll come back, right? And you have that working relationship. The last time I did 5, the people that were administering, they had this beautiful sound therapy with singing bowls and everything. And I'd always been drawn to Nikola Tesla. But the second I blasted off and they put the singing bowl on my chest and started singing it, the first thing I thought as my ego was clicking off was Tesla was right. Like that was all that and then of course, the funny thing was, as soon as I came back, like enough to like actually like, okay, I'm back. The first thing my ego said was, I knew I was right, and it was so funny. And I don't know exactly what that meant, but all I knew was that, like you were talking about with those very specific chants, sound guides you. I really believe the universe is sound. And, I'm curious for you, what has been some of the most, how do I say this? Like, the most incredible experiences with sound you've had, like those chants while on psychedelics? Because I'm curious if you've had the same thing happen where sound just hits different when you're on psychedelics. At least that's what I've always felt. I mean, you talk about going to music festivals and, doing LSD and things like that. So I'm curious if you have any awarenesses there or any insights as to what you've experienced with regards to sound and psychedelics.
Yeah, no, I mean, ayahuasca, that they're sound healing ceremonies. That's what they are. And as I was saying with the Shipibo, like their chants and the vibration that comes through their chant, the idea of it is that it's meant to break up the energetic patterns that you're carrying, right? The trauma. It's a different way of approaching it, but it's like vibration hits vibration, trying to release, trying to heal. And that's why people will purge in ceremonies. And particularly in Shipibo ceremonies, there's a lot of purging because there's a lot of singing and chanting with the intention to like unsettle you. It's not pleasant. And sometimes you feel like, somebody is drilling into you, or it's like a Pac-Man thing is eating up things. I mean, all kinds of crazy images. And also like you can sometimes you can feel like these chants are in some sense programming you. And they're very confronting and challenging to the ego. And the ego can start to make up stories about what these chants mean and what they're doing to you, obviously, because it feels like it's getting to the heart of like your attachments. And so it can be incredibly unsettling. But also, I should say beautiful, and not all chants are meant to do that. Some are meant to soothe and care and to transmit love and healing, certainly. But sometimes these chants are like, they're meant to kind of, like I said, clean you out. They are surgeries. And that's what I got from, living with the Shipibo guy. And there's another shaman that I've become very friends with, a Shipibo guy. And that's what they talk about. And different singers have different styles and different ways of approaching that. And they're all different. And then it's the same with the Lakota. I mean, the use of the drum and the singing, and they consider it, at least my teacher talks about it as though it's a technology. Like the sweat lodge is its own technology. The singing is the technology. The drum is a technology. It's a healing technology. And it's the same thing. A sweat lodge is a purification ceremony. And that they're working with consciousness, they're working with prayers, and they believe it, the same way that, people believe in our technology. It's self-evident as me sending you a text messages. Like that's how they feel about their communication. And because I sing Lakota songs, I've been singing for 5 years, and I sing in Sweat Lodge, and I sing sometimes in ceremonies as well. Like I've had the experience of actually like letting the songs come through me and communicating those songs with the intention to like crack open space or break up blockages or soothe or help or heal. Like it's really like the same thing that I'm doing in the core energetics work. It's just coming through song and sound and vibration, but it's all the same thing. And it also, because it's non-verbal, there's words really, but they're not really words. It's not the words, it's the sound, it's the quality of the sound. It opens up whole other realms of existence, and it's working in those realms where you can really, you're separated from this material world, separated from your ego, where you can really go in and help people heal and connect to the deeper parts of themselves.
Yeah, something you mentioned there, and I really love going back to basics a lot, especially with people like yourself who have so much knowledge and so much firsthand experience with these medicines. And, I feel like we were talking about in the last episode, keep it simple, stupid, right? Like, and so one of the words you said, intention. I would love to have you explain what you believe intention is, right? Because this is a buzzword these days. Have intention, do it with intention, right? And I feel as though a lot of times those words can almost lose their meaning. It's almost like love yourself, right? It's like, what does that even mean? Like, I get it. Like, I understand quantifiably what loving yourself means, but how do you actually do that as an experience? And so I'm curious with intention, like, how would you explain intention to someone if they asked you, like, hey, Dave, what do you see intention as? And what's the power with it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Well, I learned about intention as an actor. And one of the first things you learn when you're training to be an actor is not to focus on the words that you're saying, because the words are just the words. It's the intention underneath the words, like, or the motivation. They might say, what's motivating you, right? And you have to connect to that. So we could be playing a scene where I'm saying all these things that are really nice to you. That's what the words are written. But my intention underneath is to get you to do something that you don't want to do, whatever that is. And it's like, what you do is you play the intention. You don't play the words. So you really develop a strong relationship with that. When you're trained to be an actor, you realize that intention, what your motivation is everything. And the words are essentially meaningless. And so, that's how I think about intention. But it's also like, we always have an intention in every situation, whether you're conscious of it or not. And that's something for people to consider. You always have an agenda. In every moment, like you and I have an agenda here. There's an intention here we're both holding, and probably a lot of it is conscious, obviously, and maybe there's some unconscious intentions happening as well. Like it's not always easy to know. So it's one of the things when I'm working with people, ask them, like, get clear about what your unconscious intentions are, and if you're not getting the result that you want in life, then maybe that's a place to start. Like, what is it that you're actually communicating? What do you actually think about this? What do you believe? Because intention is also very much related to belief. And so, and one of the hardest things about intention is to face the fact that very often we have shadow intentions. We have dark intentions. And, if we're unintegrated with our shadow, and we're unintegrated, in the places where we're capable of being cruel, or wanting to create division, or unconsciously wanting to punish, because of the hurt that has happened to us, then we're going to have, we might have dark or negative intentions in any kind of situation. So it's like, if you want to understand your intention, look at the result. That's what I always say to people. I don't give a fuck about what anybody says. Like, people are saying, I want this, not to take it, because I know we talked about this, but it's like, when people say they want to help people, it's like, well, are you helping them? Like, what is the result? Is it working? Well, no, then that's not what that is not your intention. You probably have some other intention. So if you want to know what your intention is, just look at the result. They are correlated. That is a spiritual law.
Yes. Yeah. And that perfectly describes yet another one of my favorite quotes, which is, if you don't like what's showing up in your reality, look at what you're choosing unconsciously. And,
right.
And it's almost like, results don't lie, right? And that's one of the things that I always remind people. And that's how I actually distinguish between the vast array of information out there, right? Especially with right now, I won't, go too far into this, but with what's happening in politics and everything like this, the stuff that I try to pay no attention to. But the thing that I ask people is, okay, so you're in fear because this person, XYZ person, is saying you need to do this or don't do this or whatever, right? Okay, well, that person looks like a human skeletor. So are they the pinnacle of health that you should be listening to? Because results don't lie. They can speak big words. They can have experts up on stage with them. But if they're not getting the results that they're saying they're getting by preaching this rhetoric, then they're not actually, like, their intention is not actually pure, right? Whether they realize it or not, right? And in most cases, I think people don't realize this stuff. I don't think anyone's out there being vindictive or evil or anything like that. I think they're doing the best for what they think is the best, right? And I mean, you could even look at like examples like Hitler. He thought he was doing what was right for the world. He didn't go out there to be a devil, And so it's very interesting that with people, what I've realized is that when I'm talking to someone and I'm like, should I entertain this person's viewpoint, right? Especially if it's one that doesn't agree with me. It's like, well, what results are they getting? If they're getting results that I would like in my life, all right, cool. I'll listen to their point of view, then I'll do my own research, come to my own conclusion, et cetera. But having that awareness of, if I'm not getting what I want out of life, if, like you were saying, my intention, I think, is to help people, but it doesn't seem like I'm helping anyone. Okay, well, there's probably some malware somewhere in your brain, and it's time to take that out and make it into a firmware, aka affirmationware, So, Dave, this has been such a blast, man, getting to riff with you and jump down this rabbit hole. And this has been so much fun because you have so much experience in these realms, and I'd love to be able to connect people with you, and especially to learn more about where you practice with the Lakota tribe, what you're doing in Austin, and all the fun stuff you're doing. So where can I send people to find all that pertinent information?
Yeah, go to my website, davidsutcliffe.com. All the information is there. I have a blog, and you can find me on social media through that. I have workshops and different offerings, and it's all there on my website, davidsutcliffe.com.
Awesome. And similar to the other podcast, I have one final question to close us out. What do you say, Dave? You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, cool. So if someone listening was just swayed by you to experience psychedelic medicines for the first time, what piece of advice would David Sutcliffe give them to allow them the smoothest experience possible?
Well, I will quote one of my favorite shamans, and his advice is, never say no to ayahuasca. Only say yes. Thank you.
Yes, those are words of wisdom right there. And guys, as I stated in the intro, Dave has worn quite a few different hats in his lifetime. That being said, his ability to move through these stages of his life with confidence, even when presented with identity shifts, which can be a big challenge in and of themselves, speaks to the awareness he has gained around the totality of his being. It is no coincidence that he has also been a proponent of the conscious use of plant medicines and has allowed those experiences to not only expand his awareness, but ultimately allow him to become the sovereign creator of his life and allow him to trust the process of following his heart into the unknown. I hope everyone listening was able to pick up the lessons that Dave was speaking in following your heart and having faith in the unfolding. And trust me when I say that you'll want to continue watching Dave, as his journey is only just beginning. Dave, thank you so much once again for traveling with us today. And until next time, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.